because I said what was on my mind. I made a lot of enemies. I made a lot
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of In Defense of Virology. My name is Bryce Nichols. I'm a professor of genetics at Rutgers University. I'm joined, as always, by Simon Wain-Hobson. Simon, how are you doing today?
Yeah, very well, thank you. It's nice and warm. I've got a T-shirt, which is appropriate for June.
Today, we're going to be discussing two of the subjects covered in two of your essays, one that came out this past week on June 3rd and one that is scheduled to come out June 17th. So let's start with the essay titled Cowards Die Many Times, which is the first part of a quote taken from William Shakespeare's play Julius Caesar. And this essay, you talk about how you began kind of covering how there's all these extraordinary success stories of virology, that it's done so much. But then you'd talk about when things started to go wrong and the role of, as you put it, cowardice in sort of letting the field degrade to some of the issues we've seen today. So can you tell us a bit more about this essay?
Sure. Thanks, Bryce. It's always a pleasure. After 10 essays, I like to go wild and do something which I call on wandering. And it basically thinking about the past series of essays, or the last 10 essays, or even more. And this one is basically on wondering why so many virologists have remained silent. Dangerous gain-of-function research has conjured up novel human viruses for which the whole world is naive, and it's the equivalent of a biological weapon because the scientists publish the information through journals, big journals like Nature and Science. It's uploaded on the web, and therefore you'll never get it down. So these recipes are posted on the web. Now, just think about biological weapons. They're made usually by the military. The last thing they would do would post them on the web. You would keep all the secrets and how to make it for yourself and use it as a threat or just fear-mongering. Say, I've got this, be careful. But the civilian scientists who are making the exact same thing, they're making the agent, but they plaster it all over the web. So I've downloaded that article. You've downloaded those articles. People have downloaded them all over the place. Iran, North Korea, whatever, you name it, Russia certainly, and who is ramping up their biological weapons programs, it appears. And so these are being made, these recipes are being made free of charge, courtesy of US scientists paid for by US government, aka US taxpayers. And biologists and microbiologists. So microbiologists are basically people who work on microbes, which is historically everything from bacteria, parasites, and viruses, but it's got a connotation more for bacteria. We've been beating the hell out of microbes. We've been making vaccines to wipe them out or to knock them down. Smallpox has been eradicated. Rinderpest has been eradicated. Polio is on its last legs. Drugs, the drugs even for COVID, but the success of treating AIDS was the combination of 3 drugs together, triple therapy, and that started to knock the virus for a 6. It's down, it's not out, but it knocked it for a 6. This is what we've been doing since Pasteur's germ theory, and then followed by Koch and all these wonderful people who identified then malaria and all these other things, made vaccines and of course antibiotics and so on and so forth. And then we have this dangerous gain of function with all the promises of which I've shown written, explained in series of essays are just fallacious. And my virologist friends don't say a dicky bird. And I'm explaining and wanting to know why. And I think it comes down to 3 things. The first is scientists are not encouraged to get beyond their brief. They work in their lab, but no one encourages to say, well, what are the ethical dimensions? What are the social implications? And most are not very good at speaking to journalists because they get into details and they can't vulgarize their science. So they're not good at it. The second point is that there's been this very virulent group of people on dangerous gain of function, epitomized by members of the American Society for Microbiology, who have systematically been arguing in favor. And they've had every occasion to sort of poo-poo people like myself and sort of say, well, Wain-Hobson doesn't know what he's talking about. And then on COVID origins, there's been this virulent group of people who said, obviously, it's a lab leak. It's not a lab leak, it's natural, even though they had no data. And they were arguing from first principles because they felt they were protecting science from conspiracy theories. And of course, they were not. They were just weakening science. And the proximal origins paper is a wonderful example of this. We've discussed it. We can discuss it further. And then probably the biggest component is funding. So the NIH said, well, dangerous gain of function was okay. This was the article, the op-ed in the Washington Post from Dr. Fauci and Dr. Collins. And over COVID origins, before the change at the top of the NIH, it was clearly a zoonosis. And everyone felt that it was their duty to defend the NIH against conspiracy theories. And of course, the thing is that the NIH is a huge funder, and if you, as a scientist, if you're a biologist, you can't ignore the NIH. And therefore, they said, well, if I say something like dangerous gain of function is dangerous and COVID origins could be a lab leak, I might have my grants not renewed, or I might have my funding impacted or reduced. And so you don't poke the bear. What the bear does, whether it's good or bad, is irrelevant. You don't poke the bear. And therefore, you're afraid of it. Therefore, you don't speak out. Therefore, you get a global omerta. Omerta is this word of silence from the mafia language that runs across the whole of the globe, because every virologist in the world has a friend in the US, either collaborates, and therefore they're funded by or a friend who is funded by the NIH. So you have this total sterilization because people are afraid. They're afraid because they're not good speakers. They don't know about the ethics, although if I may say, bioethicists don't know about ethics either. And then the funding issue, and then the virulence of these little groups, snipers, if you wish, coming from the edges. And it's uncomfortable. Speaking out is uncomfortable. And therefore, it's more comfortable to remain silent. It's personally more comfortable, but that allows you to make biological weapons. Hence, it's cowardice. I try to avoid using the cowardice word because I found it, very strong. And then I came across this. I looked up Bill, who is Bill Shakespeare. I like to say Bill. And it just came back, Julius Caesar, and it seemed to be, it's a wonderful little set of lines, and I put it in.
So here are those lines from William Shakespeare. Cowards die many times before their deaths. The valiant never taste of death but once. Of all the wonders that I yet have heard, it seems to me the most strange that men should fear, seeing that death, a necessary end, will come when it will come.
Cowards die many times before their death, which is a lovely concept. And he says, of all the wonders that I yet have heard, what a wonderful balance in that. And then he says, it seems to be most strange. And then the penultimate line is pure Darwinian evolution, seeing that death, a necessary end. Death is part of the evolutionary process of substitution and replacement, and with that, getting organisms better adapted to the environment. And this is the whole thing of adapting to the environment. And Shakespeare comes up with three words: a necessary end will come when it will come. Just in itself, apart from the cowards part, there's so much in there. The man is just unbelievable. Anyway, so that's I couldn't resist it. And in there I put a hyperlink, which I would ask people to click on, because it's a link to a video. And Americans will get it because we're going to a group of parachutists in the Second World War. Obviously, the whole series of Dakotas, the DC-10, the famous Dakota airplane, and they're taking off one after the other, and they're dropping the parachutists somewhere, and it's accompanied by the song from Virologists, "We'll See Again," which was the sort of one of the big songs of the U.S. Armed Forces in was it 39-40. And these were men who were conscripted. They didn't have a choice. They were dropped. They were taken away from their families. They were dropped down. They're just saying, well, I want to see you soon. Something as modest as that in this wonderful, and the photography of this video is remarkable, I feel. And there are people, there's a bit of courage, and we can't have my virologist friends even sort of say, making weapons of mass destruction and biological weapons in civilian labs and plastering over the web, and they can't even say, I don't think that's quite right.
We've talked a lot about the Kawaoka and Fouchier controversy, which you mentioned in this essay, but I want to go back to something that you bring up regarding the poliovirus. You mentioned in 2002 that Eckhard Wimmer used molecular biology techniques that we're developing to reconstruct poliovirus.
Now, Eckhard Wimmer, he of German origin, he worked at the Department of Microbiology at Stony Brook, Long Island. A great guy. And there was the debate, well, what's going to be doing with all the polioviruses we have in our stocks and vials in the poliovirus when we finally eradicate polio? And there was a debate going on then, or should we start destroying our stocks? You've mentioned this about smallpox and rinderpest. These are eradicated viruses. Therefore, we should reduce and reduce the number of labs holding these viruses, because if ever there was an accident, it would be awful. It could be awful. And Eckhard realized that, okay, but there's a dimension that the people aren't talking about. He says, well, you can take the sequence and you could, let's say polio was completely eradicated. It's not, but it's on its last legs. But we could bring it back by synthesizing the genome. And then what? And of course, no one had ever synthesized complete a virus. And so he said, well, I'm going to try. He's not a crazy, he's a well-meaning man, and he did it for very good reasons. And I think he was right to have done it. So what he did, his group sent about just synthesizing. And so they made fragments and then put the fragments together and then ended up getting the whole thing. And they were able to make poliovirus from information. So you take the sequence that you could download from the web and make the DNA and then put it into what we call a plasmid vector, which we know can then derive full poliovirus from that. That, by the way, was an experiment done back in 1981 by Vincent Racaniello, who's been a staunch defender of dangerous gain of function. And Eckhard showed this. And so when it came out, it sort of shocked some people, but it was excellent because, and we've mentioned it in past, past essays, the information is now enough. It's on there. And so if we now go to dangerous gain of function, you don't need to obtain those viruses. You don't need to write to Fauci and say, can I have this avian flu virus that you made? And he might say no, because if you were from Iran, he might not like that. Doesn't matter. You just take the sequence that he published and is on the web, and you then make it yourself. And we've mentioned this, that it's the information. And this was hugely important because no one had considered it. So now you can, well, it used to be once you were vaccinated, it was finished. And the only thing we were scared about was either a lab, and so hence you reduce this. Now anyone can synthesize, and synthesizing a virus is easier and easier and easier by the year. And my colleagues should have said, yes, we should be more careful about what we do. And of course, there was no discussion. Remember 2002 is it post 9/11? Just been post 9/11. People were just trying to wonder what are the ramifications of all this. And he did this, and this led to a whole series of recommendations. But everyone said, "Oh, I don't know, dual use is not important. People aren't going to be so stupid as to make biological weapons." And of course, not so. We quickly saw the resurrection of Spanish flu, funded by the NIH and the CDC, and everyone said that was going to help us make better flu vaccines.
You're documenting the key moments in the history of the field of virology and pointing out that not enough discussion was had at that moment to prevent eventually where we are today. And I'd say this 2002 reconstruction of the poliovirus is especially noteworthy this week, given that there was a major news story about how, major figures in artificial intelligence and others signed this letter urging lawmakers to pass laws or regulations to help prevent the AI-developed biological weapons, essentially this threat that we've talked about before
Yes.
of combining AI with synthetic biology. The threat back then was, okay, we identify something in nature, we publish the sequence, now that can be reconstructed in a lab.
If we had been so successful and, say, had eradicated smallpox, okay, but, you could synthesize smallpox. Someone could do it. And the whole world is naive. Apart from me, I was vaccinated. Were you vaccinated against
No,
smallpox?
not for smallpox. No.
So I was. I remember vividly the nurse. I can see it today with a damn big bit needle. It was awful, and I don't know what age I was, 10 or something. Yeah. It was yes, and left a scar. Yeah. So yes, and so now you can bring it back through information, but we didn't need AI for that. That was already 20 years ago. I suppose someone could have seen it coming, but it came, and therefore that Eckhard Wimmer, hat off to him. He saw something that most people either couldn't have cared about, and he said, "Well, what are we going to do?" And of course, he had set a cat amongst the pigeons, and I don't think we really know what to do. And we said, "Well, we'll deal out later on." But yes, now you can do it. Now you can synthesize coronaviruses. You can synthesize whatever you want. If you wanted HIV, Hep B, or you want a pox virus, someone synthesized what was it? Horsepox. It was in Canada, and yes, so you can do fairly big genomes. Yeah.
So this is an interesting point, where at that time, so 2002, this is a demonstration that, okay, wait a second, we thought we could eradicate these diseases, but we can't, because once the information's out there, it can be brought back at any time. And then you say, in your essay, you say, given this, might things even go backwards? And you say, yes, they quickly did. It required some ferreting around in permafrost for cadavers of victims of the 1918 Spanish flu virus, and then that led to the determination of the gene sequence. And hey, presto, the resurrected virus was upon us by 2005. So 3 years later, we
Yes.
now have the resurrection of the 1918 Spanish flu. You mentioned that you've spoken a lot about the Washington Post editorial and the role that played after the Kawaoka Fouchier flu experiments, but there were a couple, or you mentioned an editorial in Science from a major figure in virology in this essay. You want to talk about that?
Yes. Now, what was it? The paper for showing the genesis of the virus, and so making new virus particles that the last time they'd been seen, I think, were almost a century ago, and then they went into seasonal flu but they ultimately for a few years and then went out. So this was all ready to go, and then there was someone, I think, from the House of Representatives, I can't remember his name, who just asked a question, what's this all about? because he had learnt about it. And so they hurriedly drummed up an editorial, and they asked Paul Sharp, who's a Nobel Prize for winner.
Is it Philip Sharp?
Phil Sharp, yeah, my apologies, Phil
Yeah.
Sharp. And he came out with this editorial written fairly quickly. In it was said this would help make vaccines. Well, 20 years later, there's no evidence that this had helped make better flu vaccines. Everyone says, as you think of your parents who have who need to get vaccinated every year. Everyone says that it's a pretty poor vaccine, and we don't have a universal one. We don't have a really good one. And 20 years down the line, and what is available, this didn't arise from that work. So that was just an editorial to sort of calm down. We know what we're doing. This will help us with this. You roll out the mantra of making drugs or to microbes or making a new vaccine, and this is supposed to shut down the conversation. Everything is designed to shut down conversation.
Well, this is an example. This 2005 editorial that you say was quickly, hurriedly rushed into Science to defend these experiments, and it's called 1918 Flu and Responsible Science. You have Phil Sharp, a Nobel laureate, and it's quite I think this idea that it's rushed makes sense given it's a very poorly argued case to support these experiments. It asks that, it says the good news is that we now have the sequence of this virus, perhaps permitting the development of new therapies and vaccines. Concern is that a terrorist group or a careless investigator could convert this new knowledge into another pandemic. Yes. Now that's a major concern. And then so he goes on to defend that, say, like, yes, I think we should have done this because the benefits outweigh the risks. I thought the end of the essay was astonishing in how weak it was, because he says, because a pandemic infection is dependent on many unknown properties, there is no certainty that the reconstructed 1918 virus is capable of causing a pandemic. Wow. I just thought that's astonishing. Thankfully, there's no certainty. I mean, this, and so I guess what I'm pointing out here, Simon, is it's critically, I think the use of looking at the history of how experiments are, presented to the public and who comes in to defend them is going to be maybe one way that we can help correct this in the future. When you see this pattern repeated again and again and again, where you bring in a big name, they say, this is wonderful and great, but they're using arguments that are like not, I mean,
Yes, and no one
unpersuasive is at a minimum.
no one takes them to task. No one.
Well, they're a Nobel laureate. They
well,
can't.
Exactly. Who's going to run up against a Nobel laureate? So, and
scientists can't, but the people in the public are outraged. And this is where you lose trust. Like, they think scientists, like, how can a Nobel laureate be so careless and thoughtless and frankly idiotic? Like, this is not a smart person. It's not a smart argument. I mean, he can do wonderful stuff in the lab, but to use this essay is embarrassing.
We've actually mentioned it. I used it earlier on, and nobody's perfect. This is a wonderful line from Jack Lemmon at the end of Some Like It Hot. What a wonderful film. And with Toti Curtis and Jack Lemmon. I mean, but Jack Lemmon was a fabulous performer. But he says, no one's perfect. So just because you have a Nobel Prize doesn't mean to say you know about society and societal problems, and that you know something if you're involved in some part of cellular biology. You doesn't mean to say you can speak about virology and so on and so forth. And then even virologists, as we've seen, Dr. Kawaoka and Fouchier were pushing this dangerous gain of function, and yet that's what goes back to 2012. So that's 14 years, and it has not predicted a single thing. It does not help the field on. It's actually hindered the field, and it's made life harder. It's this inability to sort of. They feel that if we don't keep saying it's great, boys, this is the best thing that's going to happen. Keep funding us, whatever. And if you sort of say, well, we might just have a. Houston, we have a problem, but instead of having an oxygen tank that's exploded, we think, well, this virus that just so-and-so made, do you realize that if someone could remake that, because we've learned from 20 02, this is now possible. No, hush, hush, hush. No, this is bad press, and this is bad. We have to be, the whole thing is, we have to be responsible, and being responsible is something that people don't do anymore. You have all the privileges of being able to work on virology, which I say is a wonderful subject. You're financed by the US taxpayers. And then when the shit hits the fan, or where there's a whiff of some odor, you, instead of sort of saying, "Oh yes, well I should address it. Yeah, sure, I'll handle it," or "Yeah, you ask questions, I'll answer your questions." They say, "No, and move along. There's nothing to see," so all the privileges, all the perks, private gains, the risks, and the responsibility. That's not for them. That's not for them. It's someone else.
This history, I think, is really useful to see, especially because, we haven't talked about the fact that a Nobel laureate came out in 2005 to lend credence, or like to support this first very dangerous and reckless experiment, and no one called them out on it. Like it's so difficult for scientists to stand up against the major figures in the field. It's a career suicide, frankly. So it makes perfect sense. You roll out big names, Nobel Prizes, people that are heads of institutions, and it shuts down debate.
And you do this in the big journals like Nature, Science, and Cell, as we've seen over dangerous gain of function or COVID origins, and you don't need to be a Nobel laureate, but you have this sort of the put down job like proximal origins coming in a Nature group paper like Nature Medicine, hugely important in my field. Yeah, that's like, it's the same thing. It's a sort of I say it's a papal bull. It's a sort of a tablet handed down, and it's not. Science is experiment and discussion, and if you close down discussion, or if you say, for whatever reasons, cowardly reasons, because you are not up to discussion of bioethics, or you're afraid of rocking the boat, then you shouldn't do it.
So the Kawaoka experiments, we've covered that a lot, and you have it in your essay about how the Kawaoka Fouchier experiments that happened with the souped up bird flu, 2011, caused a lot more attention on this issue. And now you had Fauci, Collins, and Gary Nabel publish this op-ed that you've referred to as this, omerta, to say, quiet boys, this is the way it's going to be. And if you challenge this, it's going to be a problem for you.
Just one thing, that omerta, just to make sure that people understood, they did a follow-up in the journal Science. I think it was 6 months later or something like that. Just in case you haven't heard, gentlemen, this is what you should be thinking.
Yes, that's right. That was another point of your essay where we haven't talked about that before, that there was a follow-up piece, and that was called Benefits and Risks of Influenza Research, Lessons Learned. And that was published in June of 2012, Fauci and Collins.
Yes,
So if you didn't get the message the first time,
that's right.
here you go again.
That's right.
And this is this pattern. You see the big names, the famous, just you don't want to cross them. Why would you? Career suicide.
Well, exactly. And I understand that. I mean, when you're small and wanting to, you don't have tenure or a postdoc and whatever, I understand you have to be a little bit careful. But when you've got tenure, what are all the full professors? They are in the positions where their experience, whatever, they can help. But even they dared not.
One of the sentences in that 2012 Science article from Fauci and Collins you mentioned in the essay I found quite astonishing. You say, the second shot tried to calm the troubled waters with feel-good sentences such as, the public, which has a stake in the risks and the benefits of such research, deserves a rational and transparent explanation of how decisions are made. That's in 2012. Fauci and Collins, did they deliver on that promise? No. And anyone call them out on it? No, not until recently, and it's been primarily people in the public. Scientists, very few scientists have called them out on it until very recently.
Listeners might not know, but I mean, my essays exist because of Bryce. Well, I say, I
Well, I
say
didn't write them. You
everywhere.
wrote them.
No, I
Yeah.
say it's all his fault because we were on a conf call and he challenged me and he said, are you sure about that? And are you ready to say something? And I was put onto my back foot because the comfort of from where I was. But of course, I said to myself, well, let's follow up. So we had a private Zoom meeting, and then we ended up with the essays. And then from the essays, we do this podcast. So I say it's all Bryce's fault, and it is true. We have to get discussion, and people realize that discussion is important. And even when it's unpleasant, because you can't solve problems just because you don't like the thesis. Science is experimentation and discussion together. You cannot separate. If you pretend you can separate them, then you don't know what you're doing.
In this essay that's coming up, it's going to be titled Generating Facts by Misquoting. You discuss how unsupported claims can spread through literature through this cycle where people put out, sort of junk, and then that junk gets recycled and recited, and how that sort of took on, that occurred at scale, and it's still occurring with respect to COVID origins. So do you want to talk about the sort of paper that's central to this upcoming essay?
Yes. Just when you said that, I had the word paperback writer. Do you remember
Yes,
the Beatles?
Beatles, of course.
Yes, and it just went through my head. I this is the way the brain works. Yeah, so this one is a later paper, and so it's from 20. When is it?
2020, it's called The Origin of COVID-19 and Why It Matters.
Yes, and so it's not in the first batch with the Lancet paper and the COVID origins, but this is one with some very distinguished people. Nobel Prize Peter Doherty, who was an immunologist on viruses, and I've always loved his paper. You got Beatrice Hahn, who knows backwards at the origins of HIV and did a huge amount of work on this issue. And you've got Dr. Taubberger, you've got Dr. Morins, you've got people from the P4 lab in Galveston. You've got a very distinguished group of people here. And so they talk about the origins, and there's a lot of background material about coronaviruses, fine, getting you into the topic, erudite, talking about the first SARS virus, then the MERS virus, and then it comes to SARS-2 and the origins of this. And of course, the title is The Origin of the COVID-19 and Why It Matters. So it's very, very clear. The reader wants to get to the origins. He doesn't want background information. He or she will read through it to get there, but the interest, the curiosity gets you to read this. So it gets you to the point. And it says it should be clarified that theories about hypothetical man-made origins of SARS-CoV-2 have been thoroughly discredited by multiple coronavirus experts. Okay? Thoroughly discredited. So you say, I'd like to know. Yes, so being good scientists, they put in the references. And when you look at them, you find, you find proximal origins, which we know is compromised because of the inside and under the counter sort of shenanigans. But in an essay I called Distal Truths, I showed how poor the paper was itself. Just from the scientific perspective, I didn't want to get into the social and politics of this. It's just from the science, and it's a very lightweight, very, very poor paper, and shouldn't have been. Didn't merit publication, but anyway, there we are. Then there's a couple of other references, and I went through them just to be sure, and none of them come up with a single piece of data where they thoroughly discredit the lab leak. So these people are citing other people who are, playing games like proximal origins. And of course, this becomes self-perpetuating. So you actually don't have opinion. You say, because these people discredited, thoroughly discredited, I therefore rule out this hypothesis. But the references you're using actually didn't do this. So it reinforces this fiction, which is why the title of the essay is Generating Facts by Misquoting. So you misquote people, you poorly quote them, you push your agenda, you put references, and people who do not know, and they see this wonderful lineup. Peter Doherty, I mean, he's a super virologist. There's no question about it, but not everyone is perfect. Nobody's perfect. Jack Lemmon again. And this happens, and we've seen it so many times. And then, of course, people will have cited this particular paper, which is published in the American Journal of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, fine, respectable journal, and they will use that, and so on and so forth. So it becomes established fact. And therefore, people say, well, it's, the lab leak has been discredited by scientists. I've seen a number of people, and they cite these papers, and they forget to go back to the original articles where there was disinformation. So I have the time to go through and sift through this. And I've decided to sift through papers from about COVID origins and just to see this paper trail. It's unbelievable the number of weak papers, scientifically weak, are being used to say it's a natural origin of virus. As I say, I'm very, very rigorous, and I don't think we have the key data, but it really does stink. But I want to see the key data. I've got to be rigorous. If I don't be rigorous, then I'm cease to be a scientist. I'm just become a bullshitter. And from dangerous gain of function, it's the same thing. And you see so many papers where they pile on, they cite other people's papers, and they don't go back to the original, and they say silly things, stupid things, because they haven't gone back to look at the hardcore data.
We talked about this also as with respect to the Congressional Office of Accountability
Yes.
using only published papers to assess where things stand in the gain of function debate or COVID origins and whatnot.
It's been going on, people trying to sell lead or was it iron pyrites for gold? Okay, fool's gold. And in the contemporary terms, it's called scams and scamming. People sort of trying to dress something up and say this is a great investment, you should do it, when it's a scam. You can't dress up science and make a decision on where does the COVID virus come from? Very good question, a valid question. Your listeners shouldn't feel that it's not a question where you should put 5,000 researchers on, but you can have fun, say 10, 20 to work on this, as was the case for HIV origins. Perfect sense, good science, but it's on the origin is not going to make a vaccine or a drug, but this is part of our process of inquiry on something as big as that. We need to know. It's just simple human curiosity and saying this thing killed 25, 30 million people. We need to know, period. That's because the way we are. And we can't even do that. We can't even do that. And we get people generating, they're selling us, it's scamming in contemporary terms.
I agree. So here's the thing, Simon, I think I personally, and I see hope on the horizon, frankly, in terms of changing some of these massive problems in science. First, there is a push, as I've said, before on these videos, the proposals to, defund journals. And there was a recent announcement of policy from the Office of the Budget, the Administration Office of Budget, to in fact do that, to say we're not going to allow grants to be used for publications. And I support that. That I think would help ameliorate the use of journals to perpetuate like falsehoods. I also think, again, and I've said the most important thing really is to prioritize replication and reproducibility. It's boring. And it's not something, it seems odd to say that should be prioritized because it's obvious, but it isn't until there needs to be money to incentivize doing replication. There needs to be you get credit, I guess. Scientists work on incentives and they need to be given credit if they do important work that isn't original, it isn't creative. They're just repeating somebody else's. And that's kind of normally not viewed as that great as a scientist. But if we value that more, which I think we should, and I think the new administration is saying that they want to prioritize that as part of this gold standard science initiative, that will help. And then this other component, cultural change and changing attitudes and minds, that I think is difficult and challenging. I also will say, and I will mention this just briefly, that this paper that you were just talking about, published in July of 2020, it had Dave Morenz as the first author and Jeffrey Taubenberger as a senior author. And Jeffrey Taubenberger recently stepped down as the head of the NIAID. I have been very critical of him. One of the criticisms I levied against him publicly on my Twitter many times was the fact that he played a role in misleading the public about COVID origins, as per this paper. And I would say, when people face consequences for doing things like publishing garbage such as this, that will also help to change the culture. I don't know if this paper played a role in why he's no longer NIAID director. I suspect it did, but I don't know. But here, I think you're bringing up another aspect of that paper, which relates to the use of referencing prior papers and the perpetuation of garbage. And that's was done at scale for COVID origins. And that just has to stop.
Yes, in fact, I mean, it was a bit of a coincidence. I chose this one. But the sad thing is, I could have chosen one of 2, 3, 4, 5 other papers and come to the same point. I happened to choose this one. And one of the small reasons I chose it is that it's from this journal called the American Journal of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Well, there's an American Association of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and this is their primary organ. This is their publication outlet, okay? The president of that association at the time, he has since died, at the time, is one of the authors. So it's an inside job. I would doubt very much that was peer-reviewed. He's on it. It comes from the organ. It was handled pretty quickly, I think. It's not clear when when it was submitted and so on. But it's an inside job. So once again, this reduces trust. Nature Science, we've seen this. But on the smaller journals, the same thing is happening. People using their positions of influence. And I would say this was not peer-reviewed. That would be my guess. So that was one of the reasons that I went for this one as opposed to some of the others. But I could have chosen others, and the same thing, by referencing, you build up this hypothesis, and therefore, after referencing so many times, people said it becomes fact. And it isn't. And this is a problem.
Well, it's a problem that I think I'm optimistic that there are ways of, working towards solution and improving things. And that's, I guess, the goal. Frankly, In Defense of Virology is all about offering solutions to real-time problems in virology as well as other.
We have to identify, the problems. It's like being a doctor. You first have to make a diagnostic, because how can you help your patient if you don't have a diagnostic? But if you refuse to make a diagnostic, then of course listeners can understand. Well, it's impossible. So you first have to make a diagnostic, and then try and suggest things to do. And I try in my essays to sort of have conclusions and have 1 or 2 suggestions for how you could do better. But it's not obvious, because this is so, it's everywhere. And people are afraid, and speaking out, small people can't do it. You don't rock the boat when you're small. Scientists, you see, they're afraid of finding themselves alone. So they want to be part of the club and be on everything together, hummy-dummy, and comfortable with their friends. And you invite me to this conference, I'll invite you. They want to be part of that. And if you want to sort of point out things, you'll find yourself pushed to the side, and you won't be in mainstream. And then you lose the privileges, even though you're being honest. but you'll find yourself on the outside, and people feel uncomfortable. They want to be protected. People want protection, be part on the inside and not be on the outside. It's very simple human nature. It's just people wanting to feel vulnerable and having someone criticize you. And I mean, I'm sure members of the American Society of Microbiology must hate me for pointing out their continued support of dangerous gain of function over the years. I've been hammering away at them because of all people, they should have known, and they did not. But
Well, if they hate you because you're offering an opinion that suggests that they're not like acting in good faith, I mean, frankly,
well,
and I,
in science,
yeah.
if you offer an opinion that people it shouldn't sort of turn people off.
If you, to defend the indefensible, these organizations like ASM are continuing to defend the indefensible and take positions that just don't stand up to even minor scrutiny. So
this comes
they
up.
can,
This
and the public sees it. The public sees it. Scientists eventually need, scientists don't have to agree with any of this, but people in the public that have no buy-in, they see it.
That's right. That's right. So with the dangerous gain of function, so
yeah.
the virologists were in favor. Then you speak to bacteriologists about this, and they just sort of say, but they don't want to get involved because it's not their area. So you speak
Right.
to a medic about it. So take my wife, she's a pediatrician, and she would say, why? And why? Because she's taken Hippocrates. She's dealing and trying to solve children with infections and other issues. And why? And then if I speak to my neighbor, my immediate neighbor, who's got nothing to do with science whatsoever, he's sort of said, what? Or in modern American language, you say WTF. The public sees this. The public sees the risks. They want to turn to us and say, do you see these risks? Can you sort of solve them or mitigate them? And all they see is the scientists pushing back and not cooperating. And therefore they lose trust. So this brings us back to our first paper, the first essay we're discussing. And I say something, this insistence comes with huge financial and human and societal costs, because by saying the indefensible, you're supporting research that can go nowhere. You're supporting Orwellian research because you're saying 2 and 2 equals 5, and 2 and 2 does not equal 5. I've had a paper actually on this 2 plus 2, an essay. I would love people to read it because I rather enjoyed. In fact, I enjoyed very much writing that essay. 2 plus 2, and setting students, young people who believe their bosses, delighted to start their thesis work in the lab of because on an erroneous thesis, and this is chewing up money, and it's chewing up postdocs and students and setting them around the wrong path. But the public sees, but the public turns to us to try and do it. And apart from, say, you and me hollering, who else is there? Who else is there, Bryce?
Going back to that first essay we discussed, this line, again, from that 2020 July piece from Francis Collins and Anthony Fauci, who are the two leaders of biomedical research funding in the US at the time, which they say the public, which has a stake in the risks and the benefits of such research, deserves a rational and transparent explanation of how decisions are made.
Okay.
Where is the accountability for not following? This is the point. Like when scientists look and say, these guys said this in 2012, and what did they do? We have now a decade where they remained in power. Did they provide this? Because they had the ability to do so because they were in charge. And the answer is absolutely 100% they did not. And they, I think, have yet to be held accountable for not following through on what is an obviously critically important thing to do. So if you say one thing and you have the ability to do it and you don't do it and no one holds you accountable, don't expect behavior to change. I think what will change in response to recent events is the fact we haven't spoken about it, and I don't want to get into it in too much detail, but many things, there's a lot of things that happen, like with the David Morenz indictment, the um, the debarment of Ralph Barrick, and the recent arrest of Vincent Munster and his colleague. I want to focus on one of those, which is the Ralph Barrick debarment. And the letter that explains his debarment is based on things he did I think in 2014, about a decade ago.
Okay.
And I think if one is considering, as a scientist right now, wait a second, if I do something that allows me to sort of get away with something or get short-term gain right now in this moment, if over a decade from now, with an administration that's only, like doesn't exist, or the thought of it, if I can get in trouble for that, maybe I'll think twice about what I put into print or what I say at a conference about whether or not I'm doing gain of function. That can change behavior because there is an incentive to be honest, because I may not get in trouble now. Maybe no one's going to call me out now, but if they'll call me out 10 years from now and I'll get debarred, maybe I'll think twice about that. But until we hold researchers, scientists accountable for their words, and you talk about this all the time, Simon, the importance of precise language, and words have meaning, and many scientists do not show that, do not demonstrate the importance of being precise with your words. And it's particularly important when people are making statements about what we should do, have the ability to act that way, and then act in a completely polar opposite way. That's my rant for the end of
Yes.
this
No,
thing,
and
Simon.
as we saw, it took an executive order. Was it 2 pages? And you can't do dangerous gain of function
Well,
in the US.
well,
Okay.
no, it hasn't. We still can. I mean,
No,
there's
no,
still,
you can't,
yeah,
but it's got to be transposed, and that's taking
yeah.
little time. But you have an executive order. You can do this. And you know, what we could say is, okay, we're talking, and mainly probably US listeners tune into this podcast. What are my European, French, Germans, Swiss, Dutch, Fouchier country, Fouchier land, okay? The Fouchier lands. What are they doing? Have they done something similar? Have the Scandinavian countries, who everyone admires for their quality of life and their openness and their transparency, have they done anything? No. Japanese? No. Australians? Funny, isn't it? It's still, there's things are moving in the US, but elsewhere, it's almost that it doesn't exist. That is another aspect, as though if it comes from America, the world will follow. Well, here we've had an executive order, and the world isn't following.
That's a very good point. I was told many times, don't worry, if we take care of it in the US, it'll trickle out to other parts of the world. And you're right to that. It hasn't happened. And maybe it's because it's the Trump administration that's finally taking action, and that's the optics of that or something. I don't know. But that is a critical point. Like, where are the other countries acting on this? And even some of them seem to be, there's more biolabs, BSL-3s and 4s being built, some of them in countries that have no business with such high containment labs that are
Like
super
like Wuhan, they
right.
could be in countries, India. We don't have to be hostile to European and US states, but China had problems at a time, and hopefully they're solved. But there can be times when things don't work out properly, and that's dangerous. Yeah, exactly. I don't get it, and I don't get it. And just for the US listener, good news that the executive order exists but you are vulnerable to a virus coming in from another country. So if something happened, say, in Romania or in Oslo or in New Zealand, and someone contracted it and took a plane and flew into Houston or flew into DC, heart of American government, then what?
To me, the only way they have to win the argument, right? Like the idea is
Oh,
that
yeah.
if countries believe that it's in their best interest and in national security of their country to be, having these dangerous research programs and allow dangerous gain of function, there really isn't anything, the U.S. can necessarily do about it. I think the scientific community, if they as a whole speak out against this and talk about the fact that it doesn't have any benefits, only harms, it really doesn't. That's maybe, I
What?
don't know. That's,
But well, no,
win over hearts and minds, Simon. Maybe governments.
but one
Yeah.
of the things you could do is one good, clear, coherent article in Nature or Science, and where we had references which were hard and whatever, and that Nature decided to publish this. People would say, "Goodness me, Nature is onto this." So therefore, someone in the Polish Academy of Sciences or the Polish Ministry of Research was saying, "Wait a minute, Nature's onto this. This is serious. I might not like the Trump administration or the personality of the president, but Nature is onto this. Science is onto this. Cell is onto this. This is serious," and they would pick it up. So these journals who are have tremendous influence, they could do something hugely important for society, not just for keeping the money coming into their organization and helping everything. They would have a huge impact across. And the smaller countries will other people sort of say, yes, well, yeah, we might have neglected this. Do we have a policy on dangerous gain of function? Damn it, we don't. We probably should and they would get a committee together, and then they would start contacting their friends. Do you have a committee, and what are you thinking, and so on and so forth. These journals just themselves, they don't have to go to a president to get some of this stuff done, and it's not done. So the journals are again part of the problem. And they're problem because they have such tremendous reach. And they feel that protecting the system and from marauding people who are conspiracy theorists, and if they would come down, they would wipe out and take out the rest of microbiology and virology, is absolute bullshit. Because as we've seen with Ebola, there's a huge outbreak in Northeast, ravaged, torn, war-torn. So it's a problem, part of human stupidity, but it's war-torn areas, and this is turning into a big Ebola. And they've never had a big Ebola epidemic in Central Africa. They've always been curtailed to a few hundred cases. This one seems to be going big. And these are the people who are uploading it. Because when you send a paper to Nature Science, you send it, it's a private document. They are the ones that put it on their websites, and they are the ones who are spreading it over the world. It's not US government that spreads it over the world. So they have a huge responsibility, and they're doing nothing.
Look, while we are both right-wing podcasters, one of us is a writer. Let's be honest. And that one is not me. It's you. Let's write let's do this. An op-ed to Nature, we can get people to support it or whatever. Let's see if that works. I like that idea.
I would like to feel that our listeners would support us and readers.
Well, this is the audience is the scientists, right?
Yes.
We get.
But I mean, this is something, and what we're doing, we're trying to. These podcasts in defense of virology. We're trying to protect virology. Virology is so important. We've got an Ebola outbreak, a big one in Congo, and we need people who know about this virus, who can diagnose it, can help people and the local people not to do this, and Médecins Sans Frontières and WHO, and stop this thing from spreading.
I guess the field of virology has major issues, as we've talked about, and the public is very distrustful of the field of virology and scientists by and large because of the behavior, I would say recent behaviors of virologists. And it doesn't help, the recent stories about Vincent Munzer and his colleague getting caught trying to smuggle in.
Yes.
That's not help.
Yes.
All of this is to say that we don't, the goal of these conversations is to try to separate the wheat from the chaff, to not throw out the babies with the bathwater, so to speak, and to try to come up with some sort of concrete solutions.
Yeah, but absolutely. But listeners, please realize, put yourself in this situation. What could you do to curtail this Ebola outbreak? You can't contain it with your words. You don't have the expertise. There are some virologists and public health officials who have tremendous influence, and journals have a huge influence. Lobby them, because we have the specialist knowledge, and unfortunately some of my colleagues haven't been playing ball. But if you take them all out and start again, and it'll wait, you need 20 more years, and in the meantime there will be more and more infections, and there'll be a pandemic in the next year. So we need to morph virology. We can't just say get rid of them all. We have to morph the ethic and the underlying rules of engagement. But it's the knowledge that will get the back of this Ebola outbreak, just as it did West Africa. But there's a price to pay, and it's going to be, it's going to be a big outbreak, unfortunately. But this is a war-torn, ravaged region. It's one of the hardest possible situations to handle.
I mean, the problem is actions speak louder than words. And
Always,
when you
always.
have words like these empty words that I've talked about a couple times here from Fauci and Collins in 2012, and
Yes.
the idea that like trust us is talk is cheap, actions speak louder than words, until we see more like good behavior, or the public sees more good behavior, it's not going to get better. So I do think that there's hope on the horizon with changes in incentive structures, but I get your frustration. But
No, but help us, please, listeners. Help us to help you, and because we have the specialist, and we can maybe holler and help us to do it. But we have to change the mentality. But we mustn't lose that expertise that we do have across hantaviruses, metapneumoviruses, and so on and so forth. But yeah.
Simon, I think you're not. It's the virologists that are the ones that need to change, not the public.
Yes.
You're speaking to the virologists and saying, why don't you help yourself by changing, stop being silent when you object to things, speak up when you see these BS papers being peddled as like definitive proof of the origin of a virus.
Yes.
And then you will gain the public trust.
Yes.
When you're needed, and you will be needed. There is value to what you're doing, but demonstrate your value with your actions, not your cowardice and your claims that, I just don't have time to deal with it. Anyway, we're both frustrated.
No, but we will do this, and we will get there. But as I say, the journals could have huge influence getting that, and they choose not to. This is another issue. We've had a go at the scientific administrators, but we need to go more to these journals, because they do inside jobs. They have their logic to themselves, and some of these are financially driven companies. This is not good. This is not good. Not healthy.
So to summarize, I think, first of all, Simon, it's great to see you once again. It's great to talk to you. And I'm and for maybe a little reveal here. I think we're going to get together in person, Simon, maybe sometime this fall. Just teasing that. It's going to be exciting. There might be an event. I don't know. Well, just putting that out there. I look forward to seeing you, possibly.
I've got to keep you on your toes.
Keep me on my toes, for sure.
As I'm the old fart, I'm going to keep you on your toes. Young man.
The wise elder or whatever, the elder statesman of something. I don't know. What?
So leave it to that. Yes.
Or something. So we covered the history of times where scientists, virologists kind of stayed quiet. Maybe they shouldn't have. Maybe they should have been more thoughtful and engaged with these controversial issues and subjects. And then talked about how you can have these repetitive referencing of bullshit papers leading to like scientific community believing something is a fact where the public is like, this is nonsense. Solutions, reproducibility, cleaning up the journals. I think they should get rid of the journals. And cultural changes in behavior. And frankly, podcasts. These podcasts, I think, Simon, are major, major drivers of positive change moving forward, I think.
As I've said, it's all your fault, Bryce.
And if bad actions have consequences, you will see changes in behavior. And I do think that recent events will lead to better behavior because people have faced consequences for their decisions. Anyway, Simon, great to talk to you again. And I look forward to another spirited conversation on In Defense of Virology. So with that, I'd like to say I'm Bryce Nichols. Take care, everybody.